While I'm doing this, my name is Amy Maki, and I'm the founder and president of A.O. Maki and Associates. We're a company that develops human capital. I'm just trying to migrate all you over to my second screen. I can get you there. And prior to this, I was the director of admissions, student services, and community relations at the University of Washington Alpha campus. Also have been the assistant dean in engineering at the University of Washington Seattle campus, and have lectured in the College of Education on multiculturalism. Finished my academic career at San Jose State, where I developed curriculum and served as a program specialist, developing articulation agreements with Hispanic serving institutions and historically Black colleges and universities. We have finished our little introduction. For those of you who don't know who I am, we're going to look at the learning objectives and the learning outcomes. And the reason we're going to do that is at the end of the session, you will all be completing a survey evaluating the presentation. And so let's look exactly what are these learning objectives. What I hope to do is to provide you with information regarding the components of effective communication. And we'll look at the importance of appropriate writing and speaking in academic and corporate settings. We're going to focus mostly on academic, but if you have questions on corporations or job interviews, things like that, I'll be happy to answer those. And improvement of communication skills through written and verbal activities. Participation is what activities means. So get ready to participate. Then nonverbal communication cues are such a key component getting your message across. I am going to spend a little time on that particular subject. Then we're going to go into the components of your personal statements, and I will give you an assignment to be completed by a particular deadline. I will not go over all the details. They are written just like an application to a university. You should be able to read the application and follow the instructions. And what I hope you will gain is a better understanding of what effective communication is, how to avoid the common mishaps. And again, we're going to look at the nonverbal communication cues. We're going to have an exercise, which I hope will point out the importance of those cues. And miscommunication can happen if they're not used correctly. And then I'll give you the assignment for your personal statement. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please don't hesitate to ask. Unmute. I will try to identify when you use the emoji and raise your hand. This is my first presentation on Zoom, so we aren't too familiar with the techniques. The way I'm going to proceed is to give you a definition of the terminology of communication. Again, we'll look at the components, we'll conduct an exercise, look at the components of written communication, and then begin the process of understanding what a personal statement is and is not. So let's look at the definition of communication. According to Merriam-Webster, an act or instance of transmitting information transmitted or conveyed, a verbal or written message. And this is key, a process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common. Notice that the word common is bolded. Systems of systems, signs, or behaviors. The common applies to what we're going to talk about next, and that is audience. The example I like to use is from Dr. Luis Vasquez. He once said that if two Chicanos are walking by each other, what do? He says they do the nose thing. So what does the nose thing mean? Well, to the two Chicanos that are passing by, it means, hey, I see you. Everything's cool. I'm going by. We see each other. I acknowledge who you are. They have a common understanding of what that behavior means. What if the Chicano student passes a sensei such as myself, Japanese American, don't have a clue what that means, but a Chicano student comes walking by me and says, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, am I supposed to be smelling something? What's in the air? Or I'm saying, oh, he stuck his nose up at me. How disrespectful. So what do? Frequently, Asians do not have very good eye contact. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bow my head and I'm going to walk on by. What has just happened? Because there was not a common understanding. The student did not understand who I was. I didn't understand who he was. So what happened? There was miscommunication. Instead of getting the message across, there was miscommunication, which we are going to try to avoid at all costs. The common system also applies to the audience. The components of verbal communication. The first question, who are you speaking to? Is it to the NSF grant committee? Are you asking for money? And if you're asking from Dr. Jones, you better make sure you hear what he's asking. What was being said? So who's your audience? Is it the admissions committee? Are you in a job interview? Are you taking an interview with the department chair? What are they asking you? If it's the department chair, they may be using technical terms. So you'll be able to respond to those terms. Again, audience and what is being said. Third, what words do you use? What is your message? So word selection. If you're speaking to a department chair, again, you can use technical terms. If you're speaking to me as a non-specialist, you get too deep into thermodynamics, which I'm sure you all love. I'm not going to have a clue. So the message is going to be lost on me. Understand who your audience is. Listen to the question. And here is a key component of verbal communication. How do you verbally communicate? What are the paraverbals, the cues that send a certain message? What's the tone, the pitch, the pace, the inflection? Notice even when I read that to you or I say that to you, I'm stopping with each word. So I'm giving emphasis to the word, tone, pitch, pace, and inflection. I'm also saying it slower, emphasizing the words. We are also going to talk about body language, but I want to go back to this paranormal cues and give you an exercise to demonstrate how important it is in getting your communication across. What is your message? More importantly, how do you verbally communicate it? So here's a question. Okay, The question is, and I'm not reading it out loud on purpose, I want you to say this sentence first. Normal pace, it's a question. Who's your audience? Oh, let's say it's a teenager. You're the parent, and you're just asking this question. Please say it out loud. You can mute or unmute, it doesn't matter. Just say it normally, like you were asking a question. You say, one more time. Now, I want you to emphasize this word right here. Try it again, emphasizing this word, you. Say it again. Okay, let me say it. So I'm the parent and I'm looking at my child eye to eye and I say, did you study? That's one way of saying it. Here's the second way of saying it. Did you study? Okay. Tell me what the message is when I say, did you study? Versus, did you study? Notice also my body language. The first question was, did you study? And the second is, did you study? Okay, what did we hear? What was the difference in those two modes of communication? Unmute, anybody?
Calm and aggressive.
Calm and aggressive, okay. What else?
I feel like the first one you were asking them just, in general, like, did you study? But the second one, they probably failed their test and came home and you're like, oh man.
So anybody else?
Oh, your body language was different. Like you leaned in.
Right. Very good. Very good. So saying, did you study at that pace was just, hey, did you do it or didn't you? Just an average, ordinary question. A parent probably frequently asks their student, their child, I should say. But when I say, did you study? And I leaned into it and I'm looking at them and I emphasize the word you, a little more accusatory, don't you think? Saying, hey, I'm not sure you did, so I'm going to make sure you studied. Did you study? So there was a change in pace because when I asked the first one, I said, did you study? A little faster than, did you study? So a pause, emphasis on the word. So are you beginning to see the importance of the tone and the pitch and the pace? You can see there's a different message being sent. Now, how about the response? Say it as if you did it. Now, just choose any one of those words and emphasize it. For example, this word, did. Say it. Say it a couple times with a different emphasis on a different word. Can you hear the difference? What's the message being said? And let me give you a couple examples.
Studied hard last night.
The first one is cut out a little bit, but it was, I did study hard last night, is the example. How about this one?
Studied hard last night.
I did study hard last night.
I did study hard last night. I did study hard last night.
That's one of my favorites. Kind of the whiny tone of defense, right? But let's hear what What did you hear in the differences in the response? Let me play it again.
Did study hard last night.
So what response, how does that compare to this one?
Study hard last night.
I did study hard.
One is kind of informative and one is kind of convincing.
And how I like they on this one.
Did study hard last night.
Notice there was a pause. I did study hard last night. What does that say? What's the message there?
That was probably the only time she studied hard.
Right. I studied, but I did it last night at the last minute, right? And this, like I said, is one of my favorites.
I did study hard last night.
What is that message? Is it assertive? Is it defensive? Is it what?
It's defensive and convincing.
Trying to convince the parent. Well, yeah, but that whiny tone is a being a parent and a grandparent. That's a very common method of communication, adding the little whining sound to it. So there was a different pitch, right? Different tone. So depending on what the message is and how you present it, the paraverbal cues that you give through tone, pitch, pace, and word emphasis. Did you study? I did study hard last night. Matters, right? So those are the things you also might want to practice when you're doing a presentation so that you are getting the right tone and pitch. Okay. Now, one of the other key components, and maybe one of the most important, other than this paraverbal communication, is let's look at body language. Whether we are on Zoom or we are face-to-face, these things matter. Appearance. You were asked to come to this conference in business casual. If you come to the conference and you're wearing a frumpy-looking t-shirt and a baseball cap, I'm thinking to myself, one, you didn't listen to the instructions. Two, you really aren't serious about this particular session. And of course, I, being the presenter, I think my session is the most important. So you should look like you care, okay? So distance. In face-to-face presentation or when you're meeting somebody, distance is important because we all have a personal space. If somebody gets close to us, we kind of might want to back away. So you know when you're feeling comfortable or uncomfortable. So that happens for you as well as the speaker. Location is also important with this Zoom era. Now I've noticed, and like I say, this is my first Zoom conference or even presentation. And so location is important because if I get really, really close up here to the camera, people are going to start looking at my face and everything else, and they're not going to listen to my message, right? So there is an appropriate distance. Also, if you're looking down and you're doing something else, I can tell you're not paying attention to me because there's no eye contact. You're not looking into the camera. And to be honest, since this is my first presentation, I have a sticky notepad marker up there on my computer that has an arrow and it says, "Look here!" exclamation mark. because I found myself when I was practicing, yes, I did practice, that I kept looking at myself rather than the camera. So that means I would not have had eye contact with you, which is a very big mistake in verbal communication when you're speaking face to face. Here's another important part is facial expression. Here's where you have to be sincere and honest and know what you're talking about when you're responding to someone. Because your facial expression can say one thing and you're saying another. You know when you're with your peers, if somebody says, "Oh yeah, I really like that outfit." Do you really like that outfit? I don't think so, not with that facial expression. So you really have to be careful, one, about what you're saying and the sincerity of it, because it's going to show on your face. Physical contact. If we were in the era when we were actually seeing one another and we could shake hands, that's one thing. If we get back to that era, I do not like the double handshake where somebody grabs my hand with both their hands. Or if somebody grabs me by the shoulder while they're shaking my hand. So if we get back to that era, we're going to shake hands, just one hand. Firm. Hi, how are you? Now, in this elbow bumping era, I also don't want to be thrown across the room with your elbow. So it is just sort of a gentle kind of, okay, hey. Somebody in the other session said, well, what if somebody reaches out and you want to do the elbow? My recommendation is that you just take a slight step back. You don't have to run across the room. Take a slight step back and raise your arm up so they know your body language is telling them, I would prefer that we do an elbow bump versus a handshake. Does that make sense? Have any questions? So, body language, first impressions do matter. Posture, facial expressions, eye contact, physical distance. So, words, voice, that's your pitch, tone, inflection, and then again, body language. Now, there's some commonalities between written and verbal communication that I'd like to share with you because they both start out with self-assessment. In other words, you have to know thyself. And that phrase comes from the Greek walls of Delphi, where people would go and meet with, and they wanted wisdom. They went to the oracle, the wall of Delphi. And one of the first phrases is know thyself. You have heard this through this entire conference that you need to have self-assessment and know thyself. Dr. Jones said it was understanding your history. Mr. Weller said, what's your passion? And by the way, the book he recommended is $1.71 as a used copy on Amazon if you do want to get it. And Dr. Blevins said in his conference and his session that you have to know who you are in order to get the mentor. What are your needs? Which means you needed to know what your strengths and weaknesses are. There was a question for Dr. Hemsphere from transportation. I don't know if you remember this. Someone asked, well, how do you balance ethics and politics? If he had no clue what his core values were, who he was, one, he could have never taken the job. And two, he can't answer that question. How do you balance politics and your ethics unless you know what your ethics are, what your core values are, what's your strengths and weaknesses? Are there any life experiences that reflect who you are? Now, I'm going to reiterate this. So we did our self-evaluation. We understand our history, as Dr. Jones would say. And I'm reiterating this again and again, that you have to know who your audience is. So if you're applying to graduate school, is it the program director? Is it admissions committees? What are the questions that they're asking you? Might have to speed this up a little bit. So what are the components of written communication? And surprisingly enough, they're very similar, if not the same, to what the components of verbal communication are. Who are you writing to? Who's your audience? Are you writing to that admissions committee? Are you asking Dr. Jones for NSF research money? What is being asked? So you want to answer the question that is being asked. So read carefully. What is your response? Similar to verbal. What word usage? What is your answer? How do you convey the message? Now, you might think, well, pace, pitch, tone, inflection have nothing to do with written communication, but they do. It's just how you get there. So punctuation is a way of getting there. Remember when I was reading pitch, tone, inflection, those words I paused because there were commas there. So that's what commas will do in your writing. Grammar, using correct verb and subject agreements. If you aren't using correct grammar, I get lost in correcting your grammar and I don't read your message. Formatting. You can bullet things, you can bold things. I asked you to remember in the first definition, item 3, I bolded the word common. That was to emphasize the word. You could do that. I would not overuse that way of making emphasis on a word, but once during an essay, maybe. Italicizing is another way of bringing focus on a word or a sentence, a quote, whatever. Formatting also with list of items bulleted may or may not work for what you're trying to say. All those things help with the pace and the inflection in your written communication. So if you do not know what a semicolon is for or what it does, look it up. Find out what a semicolon does. Find out what a colon does. What does it do for the reader? Does it make them stop? Does it make them go on and on with no commas if you don't put anything in there? These are things that you have to start learning now because it's key not only to your written communication, but verbal, so that you know when to pause, when to not ramble, but put a few pauses and commas into your conversation or in your written document. And where do you learn about this? Well, you can learn a lot, I'm sure, on Googling things, but you have writing centers on your campus where you can go and seek help. You have peers that are very good writers. You have faculty that may, in fact, be willing to look at some of your documents. This is where what Dr. Blevin said earlier, finding a mentor is so important because you are going to need some support along the way. Now, one thing I want to say is when you start to write, you take pen to paper. Okay, I just aged myself. So you don't take it from pen to paper. You type it into your computer and you save it. So you go up there, you enter your information, and you go up to save as. Save as, when you're writing, means it's saved as of this moment. But guess what? The moment doesn't last. You have to edit it and rewrite it, because the old adage says writing is rewriting. So one time is never, ever going to be good enough. Writing is rewriting. So let's go and look at the personal statement specifically. So personal statements usually focuses on who you are, that is your qualities and character. It can also include your research interest if statements of purpose is not requested. Remember who your audience is. The introductory paragraph. Let's just spend a little moment on the introductory paragraph. And that is, it's the attention getter. It says, read me. Attention getter. That's what the first introductory paragraph is going to do. Okay, I want also to show you, see how the commas are here in the first bullet? Personal statements usually focus on who you are. That is. So did you notice even when I read it, I sort of paused and it gave it a little emphasis? So learn how to use punctuation when you're writing. I'm going to review some of the components, and remember, the first thing that we have to do is we have to understand who we are. Know thyself. Dr. Jones said, understand your history. Dr. Waller, again, passion. So we begin by finding out who we are by maybe self-reflection, and conversations with family, friends, mentors, employers. And you know your friends are more than happy to point out your weaknesses. Don't take offense. Just understand they're trying to help you. Okay? And here, also remember, if you do identify any of the weaknesses in your personal statement, that's not what you start out with. Remember what Dr. Jones said. You kind of want to make them look for what your weaknesses are, but maybe acknowledge them in a positive way. I'm a procrastinator. Well, we don't say, well, I'm going to enter graduate school. I know I'm a procrastinator, because you know that graduate schools and programs want you to graduate in a timely fashion. So you might say, I've been working on my time management skills, rather than saying I procrastinate. So do you see the difference? I'm saying I have a little bit of a weakness, but I am working on it. And that sends a different message. Okay. Again, introductory paragraph invites the reader to learn more about you. Rephrasing what a personal statement is. It's an essay that tells the story about a main character. The main character is you. You as a person, you as a student, you as a scholar, you as a future leader, a future researcher, So we want to know in the personal statement who you are. How does who you are impact what you're going to do at my institution or my department? And what's the benefit of you being here? Not only to you, but to, well, shall we say, mankind. And Dr. Jones put it this way: we want to know about your intellectual merit, but we also want to know about your broader impact. Intellectual merit, broader impact. Who am I? How does it impact what I'm going to do? How does it impact the greater good? Okay. Now, also the conclusion. And in the assignment that I gave you, there are sample questions that you might want to answer in each one of the paragraphs. The conclusion is a paragraph where you quickly summarize what you've said, give an introduction to some of your immediate goals, but more importantly, where does this all lead you? Tell me about how all this is going to impact not only your future, but the future of the program, the institution, the greater good, in other words. Okay, any questions? Okay, so what are the barriers to both verbal and written communication? First of all, if you haven't done a self-assessment and you don't know who you are, in other words, know thyself, the rest of this is totally irrelevant. You have to have known who you are. And then we're going to look at what the barriers are, listening, using acronyms. Don't assume that your audience knows what, is it BTW? Yes, BTW is one of the text things. So yeah, that tells you my age and how familiar I am with technology. But if you say BTW, somebody else might not understand what that means. You notice in my introduction, I didn't say HSIs and HBCUs because I don't know who's all in my audience today. So I use the words to convey my message. All right. And for God's sakes, I know that you would never do this, but do not use those acronyms and some of the text things in your lab reports. I've heard horror stories how students are using those abbreviations in their lab reports. Not appropriate, not appropriate. Distractive mannerisms. I don't know if some of you are kind of like play with your earring type people, or you tap on the desk and I can hear it. I don't know if you can hear that, but if you're a pencil tapper, earring mover, play with your hair, whatever the distractive mannerisms are, limit them. Because if it's face to face, I'm not listening to you, but I'm watching you. A distractive mannerism in writing may be overuse of commas, and we'll get down to that too, where we look at grammar. Rambling responses. If you're writing for a research grant, they ask very specific questions. And if you do not answer the specific question, I can guarantee that your request goes to the wayside. If you leave a blank, if you don't answer, how many test tubes do you need? And you don't answer. That goes to the wayside. So don't ramble, answer the question, be concise, be specific, and then go on to the next question or the next subject they may ask you about. Again, grammatical errors. If you are not a native English speaker, you need to go to their writing centers. You need to start practicing. Now, if you're from a country where the names are not familiar to whoever you're speaking to, you need to speak slowly and articulate, because I'm only going to ask you so many times how to pronounce your names or lean into you and say, now, what was that again? In this also, when I'm talking about grammar, goes to subject verb agreement and all the things that go along with grammar. But if you misuse them, I'm focusing on all your errors and I'm not listening to your message. Whether it's verbal communication or written communication. And you notice my body language. I am telling you this. I am leaning forward. I'm tilting my head, hoping that you're listening to what I'm saying. You don't want to have grammatical errors. Inappropriate body language, the slouching, the finger pointing, those are also distractions. Okay, well, now that you've pointed out all these things that are wrong, that could go wrong, how do I avoid them? Well, let's look at a few things. First of all, what is being asked? Make sure you hear what is being asked so that you can respond appropriately. So, what do I want to be heard or read? Think about what it is. What's your message? Again, how am I expressing myself? Be aware of proximity. What is comfortable? So if we're face to face, are you in my personal space? Am I in your personal space? Are you sharing too much in writing in your personal statement? I don't need to know all the intimate details about what may or may have happened to you that has sent you to studying engineering. So remember, proximity. Again, she says, grammar, subject, agreement, subject, verb, agreement. Look at the grammar, what you're using, how you're, and it's so critical, particularly if I'm an admissions director. And like I said, if I'm reading 100 applications and I start focusing on your grammar and your word usage versus the message, then you've basically lost me. Verbal communication and written. How do I sound? What is the word choice and punctuation? These are all things to remember. So the message that you want to send is in fact received. Any questions? Comments? Okay, let me just conclude by saying this. To successfully convey a verbal or written message, the very first thing, which is not here, is what I want to hear you say is, know thyself. Understand your history. Can we say it? Know thyself. Understand my history. Because knowing that will make a lot of your answers, your responses, whether written or verbal, a lot easier. Then we know our audience. Is it a faculty member? Is it a department chair? Is it a general admissions committee? Am I asking for money? Is it a scholarship committee? We have to understand what is being asked from each one of these people or the audience. Clearly understand what is being asked. Think through your response. Respond to the specific request directly and concisely, and practice. And you say, well, I'm going to give a talk. How can I practice? You can practice in front of a mirror. You can practice with your peers. You can practice with your friends, even if they're English majors. You can practice with them to make sure that you get the right tone and pitch. Practice, practice, practice. Writing is what? Writing is rewriting. So save as is only for the moment. Writing is rewriting. An example of preparation and practice. I shared with you that this is my first Zoom conference. It's my first session presentation on Zoom. I took Dr. Blevins' advice, and that is I sought out mentors. And what a better mentor is a student, because you are all high tech and you've been going to class on Zoom. So I reached out to a young man, a MATC scholar, and soon to be a Stanford student by the name of Devin Addison Turner. And I asked him to help me. And notice there's nothing wrong with asking for help. So he had to teach me what to share a screen mean, what is a chat, but that's the importance of a mentor. I had to ask Larissa Cessna, how do I log into the conference? Which button do I click? All those things have to do with preparation and practice. So thank you to my mentors. And the next challenge is going to be having the protege, me, actually implement what they taught me to this date. Okay. I want to share with you what your assignment is. And that is, I want you to write a personal statement. It has to be in a Word document so that I can edit it. I want it sent to my email address, which I will give to you. And if you have a university address that has the edu, that would be preferable for the simple reason it will prevent it from going into my junk file or anything else. I will check them. If you don't have a university address, that's fine. Use what you have and I'll retrieve it. The instructions are on the document. And the reason I am not going over them is because no one's going to go over your application request. You are going to be sitting there reading the request from the university, and you'll have to learn how to follow instructions. The verbal instructions I'm giving you, you have to learn to listen. So I said, Word document, send it to my email. If possible, use a university, your university mail. So are there any questions? Chica, you have a question? Unmute. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, I do. I have like a couple of them. But so for somebody like me, English is not necessarily my first language. My first question is, how do you go about people who misinterpret your tone in a text message, or when you write something and they read it how they think that you would have said it? And also, is it better to, in some situations, call or speak to the person, face to face than sending a message?
Okay. To respond to your question, first of all, depends on what the question is. If you're asking for an opinion, or are you stating opinion and you don't want it misinterpreted, you may want to call, because that way, if there's a question about what you're saying because of the tone or your inflection, that person can instantly respond and say, well, did you mean this? And then you can clarify. When you text, a lot of times people will just read it and either be insulted or not understand and just leave it. They just let it go. They assume that they understand what you're saying. So if it's a critical piece of communication, I personally would do it either face-to-face or call. Now, there was a question about misinterpreting your tone or your pitch or your pace, one of those paranormal cues. This one is a little more challenging because it's a face-to-face. So here is where knowing your audience matters. If it's a predominantly white audience, if it's predominantly an Asian audience, if it is mixed, it is key to understand what some of the cultural norms are before responding. And if you don't know, you can go to friends, family, mentors, and find out. Because a lot of things can be misinterpreted. So word choice, again, is very key. And I'll give you an example. I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood in Cleveland. And I came to Seattle, Washington, where I went to college and I did high school, blah, blah, blah. But my formative years were in Cleveland, Ohio. Now, if I say to a group of African Americans, hey, man, I'm trying to get this message to you, but y'all aren't listening. Okay, can that be misinterpreted as, oh, look, she's emulating us. She's making fun of us. She's trying to be one of us. So knowing who your audience is so important. Now, I have a major also in Spanish. So if I go and I start yoing and essay and all this of course, I might be misinterpreted. I'm not trying to be a part of, but it could be interpreted that way, correct? Am I wrong? If I come up and you say, hey, sister, and you're looking at me like, whoa, one, you're way older than I am, and you don't look like my sister. So it's very important to know your audience. So did I answer your question, Chica?
Yes, ma'am. And then my last question was, in terms of writing, because that's not my strongest suit. I'm a math formula type of girl. I don't do writing very well. So I tend to always have like a lot of like the commas and grammatical errors. So I've tried to work on it, but what is a good I know you did say go to the writing center, but what would you advise? Like, is it writing over and over again to get better at it? Because that tends to, for me, that discourages me from writing. Like if I'm applying for a scholarship that has writing, in it, I'm just like, they're probably gonna not accept me because my writing is about to be really bad. And sometimes I tend to write like the way I talk. So what is like the best, way to go about that?
Okay. Here's my advice. One is to read. There is nothing better than reading documents and seeing how others communicate. Two, I'm sorry to say that writing is rewriting and you may have to practice. Also, writing centers and faculty members, your mentors, have them read your documents. I mean, it's going to be a challenge for you, but if in fact you have identified that as a weakness, then it's going to be your responsibility to work real hard at getting better. Because I'm not sure anybody has mentioned this, but engineers, although you love your science and you love your math, a lot of what you're going to be doing when you get out is speaking and writing. You're going to write because you want a proposal written, you want to be funded, you have invented the neatest thing and you have to convince others that they should invest in it. We have to speak clearly and speak well, because when you do have this great invention, you want to tell people about it. So communication is key to a lot of your success, both academically and professionally when you get out of school. Okay, we have another question.
Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome. And I have to get my glasses because I'm going to lean real close here. Is it Naji?
It's Najee.
Najee, sorry. For one, I don't have my glasses on and I couldn't get close enough to read it. My apologies. What is your question? Are you muted? I didn't hear you.
So my question is on, can you hear me?
Yes.
My question for verbal communication. For students like myself, I have anxiety when speaking in front of a large amount of groups. So I wanted to ask you, what are some tips that you give students who have anxiety when speaking in front of a?
Okay. My recommendation is practice. Practice in front of a mirror. The more you practice, the more confident you become. So practice in front of a mirror if you don't want to do it in front of your peers or anybody. To be honest, I practiced this presentation over and over again. And it wasn't because I didn't know what I was saying, but I just wanted to make sure that my body language and what I was saying was understood. So make sure that you practice. Thank you all for being here. And have a great
Thank you.
Before you leave, Maki, one of the things I wanted to add to your comment to Nigel is she could also video herself.
Oh, excellent, Judy. I didn't even think about that. Thank you.
And play it back. That way you can also spot improvements, as well as you can also show it to other people and they can use that to spot improvements for you to make as well.
Excellent idea. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I'll see you guys in the other room.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all.